I should not be who I am. I grew up in such an unbelievably crazy, broken environment. By all accounts, I should be an alcoholic. I should be an abusive father or an abusive husband. I should have all kinds of addiction problems, and I don't. Never really knew my real dad growing up. My parents were divorced when I was probably 9 months old. He was in the Air Force, and so we moved back to Michigan. I was born in Omaha. We moved back to Michigan and never really knew him growing up just because of his service in the Air Force. He moved around the country a lot. So there was always that distance between he and I, and growing up, never really got a chance to know him. And then my mom, she got remarried and he was an alcoholic. And he was an angry alcoholic. So that sort of ushered in just years and years of abuse in our home, probably until I was 12 years old. And I mean, the first 12, 13 years of my life, to be honest, I don't have a lot of great memories. I just have a lot of hurtful, broken memories. There was a college girl that lived next door, and she would come over and babysit my brother and I, because my brother is 4 years younger than me. So she would come over and babysit, and I remember at some point during those years, she started this really inappropriate physical relationship with me. And when you're in fourth or fifth grade, you don't really know what to do with that. You don't exactly know how to handle that. And I mean, on some level, I knew that it was wrong and inappropriate. But again, what does a fourth or fifth grader or a sixth grader say to this college girl who really has all the control? And you don't want to tell anybody about it. You don't want to tell your mom or your dad or anybody, partly because you're afraid that you're going to get in trouble, that maybe I'm the reason she's doing this, that I've caused this, and so you don't want to get in trouble for what you're involved in. I mean, I was afraid to live in my own home because of the abuse that was done on me as well as my mom. And then even this outside relationship I had with someone that you think you would be able to trust, that environment for me it wrecks a person. It just completely warps your view of the world. It changes the way you think about people, changes the way you think about yourself, changes your perspective on life. It introduces things into your heart and into your mind that just shouldn't be there. And man, that just screwed me up. I don't know how else to say it. That living that way for that long in your own home with people you should be able to trust just messes a person up. But there were people along the way that I just feel like God definitely put into my life. The youth pastor at the church that I grew up in, some really great people at the church that I grew up in who just loved me through it all. I think they knew what was going on. And I think specifically about my youth pastor, I think through him, I really started to see that God was real. He wasn't just something that was written on a page, that it wasn't just a story necessarily from a book, that there really was a real God and he was showing up in this real person. As I got older, he started sharing a little bit of his story with me and how he had a very similar relationship with his first father. And some of his story, there was some abuse in his story as well. He just had a lot of anger growing up as a kid, a lot of shame for some of the things that he did because of his own rebelliousness coming out of the environment that he came out of. So to me, it was just amazing that here was a guy that could relate to me, who could understand what I was going through, and he wasn't an absolute wreck because of it. There was something different about him, and he was just trying to share. I think he was just trying to love me and walk with me through that. And hearing his story and then seeing who he was then at that point in his life, that's just where I think I started to look and think, again, God is not just something that's written on a piece of paper. He can change people, because look at this guy. Look at his life. Look at who he is now. Because of everything that I went through and that environment that I grew up in, I had built up an awful lot of anger, certainly towards my mom, towards my parents, just towards people in general. So I built up a lot of anger. I had a lot of shame and a lot of guilt for some of the things that I had done in my life. I became very rebellious, which is probably natural for someone who's gone through what I went through. And I remember when I was 16, that rebelliousness and then that anger really just started to peak. And one night, I had been out. I had borrowed my stepdad's car. It was a company car, and I was out with my girlfriend, and I came home way past curfew, so I had broken the boundaries, and came home. And even though I had, violated the rules, I didn't think that I'd done anything wrong. And my mom and my stepdad confronted me on that, and my stepdad and we got into this all-out fist fight in my room. It was just this all-out brawl, throwing punches and headlocks, and it was just this insane moment in my life. And I remember once he got away, in that moment, I had just had enough, and I was just so sick and tired of the anger and the hurt and all that stuff that I'd found a hunting knife, because I was a hunter, that was sitting in my room, and I grabbed it and I just sat on the edge of my bed with my stepdad, sitting out in the family room, getting ready to call the police, and I was just going to end it. That was it. I was going to take that knife and I was going to end my life, because I couldn't take it anymore. And eventually I got arrested. The cops came, put me in the back of the car, and they drove me off to Pine Rest. And I spent a month in Pine Rest, and it was there that actually met a counselor who, great therapy, great counselors, but one of the counselors in particular started to talk to me about the power of God in a person's life, and how it was going to take God to heal me. It was going to take the power and the presence of God in my life to heal what I had gone through. Therapy could help, all the counseling could help. To get at what was deep and what was dark, it was going to need to be God. And I think it was there, probably that month that I spent over Christmas in Pine Rest, that I think that was probably a turning point for me. And I started on my road of recovery. But during that time, I remember just picking up the Bible and reading about Jesus, and because he would talk to me a lot about who Jesus is and what he did while he was here on earth. And so I just started reading, the stories of Jesus that are in the Bible. And the more I read about this person of Jesus, the more I just fell in love with who this guy was. And I read stories about how he would love anybody, no matter who they were, no matter what they had done. To love a leper, to put your hands on a leper, to love a prostitute, to love really the least of these, to love tax collectors who were hated, back in that society. He would love anybody no matter what their past looked like. And I had this incredible past that I was so ashamed of. And it was such a broken past and such a hurtful past. And yet I'd read these stories about how Jesus would love these people. I'd read these stories about how Jesus would heal people too. And some of it was, these magnificent healings where he would heal them physically, and people could walk and people could hear that couldn't hear before. But I have to believe that people's hearts were healed, that people's souls were put back together, that shattered spirits were put back together. I just started reading about who Jesus was, and then I started praying, and I just remember so many nights praying just desperately. God, you got to heal me. You got to take this anger. You got to take this hurt, because I can't get rid of it, and I don't know what to do with it, and I don't want to be this person. I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be so full of shame the rest of my life. I don't want to have this guilty conscience to drag around. And I just remember so many nights, even as a teenager, just crying out of my knees, God, if I'm going to be somebody that's not angry and just full of rage and hurt and brokenness, then you're going to have to do something about that for me. And I mean, I don't ever like to sound like, over spiritual or mystical, but something just began to change. And the only thing that I can say is that it's the person of Jesus Christ in my life. If there's anything I want people to know is that He can transform. He can change anybody's heart, anybody's life. And there's such immense hope for you, no matter where you've been, no matter where you are, no matter where you think you're headed. Because He became present 2,000 years ago, I am who I am today. It's because of Him. And I just want people to know that.